This week, we're going to talk a little bit about wellness. Wellness is one of those buzzwords, and it drives a $4 trillion industry. Where did wellness start, and how did it get to where it is today? Welcome to the Living Life Our Way podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping you live intentionally. Our goal is to take back control of our lives by living life on our terms. Join us as we work towards living life our way. Welcome back. I'm Jeff.
I'm Troy.
And this week, a new book called The Wellness Trap came out by author Christy Harrison. And Harrison takes a rather provocative view of wellness. In the book, she says, you might say that wellness is to true well-being what social media is to human connection, an ongoing attempt to attain the principle of the thing, which only sometimes succeeds and more often takes people further from their objectives to the tune of billions or even trillions of dollars per year. What do you think? Is wellness the social media of health?
I think there's some fairness to it. When we read the book and talked a little bit about it, I think she makes some really strong points that the idea of kind of a broader holistic wellness has morphed into a place where it really is very specific and really is almost more about how people are viewing you or the image that you're portraying as opposed to what those actions, those behaviors are actually doing for you in terms of making you more well overall.
Yeah, it's definitely come to kind of a head where the physical aspects of wellness in particular are almost more for other people than they are for yourself. Similar to how social media, a lot of people say they're using Instagram like a journal, and they might well be, but in a lot of instances, it's the likes that are kind of driving that continued use of social media more than the internal remembrance aspect of social media.
Sure. And I will say one thing as I was reading the book that it was a good reminder for me that we always have to be careful. We normally have to, or we naturally have to paint in broad strokes. And in doing so, those kind of general stereotypes, even if they're accurate for a lot of people, there are going to be people that they're not accurate for. So those that are going to the gym and posting all these pictures to Instagram, sure, for them that exercise really may be just an exercise of trying to get more likes and get more attention. Where there's other people that are going to the gym and that really is a place where they are able to commune with themselves in a different way and really create wellness. So we do have to be a little bit careful that we distinguish between kind of the general stereotype or a generality while understanding that it's not true of all people.
Yeah,
so.
And I do think the author does a pretty good job of that, where she says kind of this is where a lot of people fall into the trap, but it does, just because it doesn't work globally doesn't mean that for some individuals it does. Right. It works just fine. So
right.
I do think that was an interesting insight that this book kind of gave me on wellness is, yeah, there's a lot of problems with it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that on an individual basis these people are necessarily ill-intentioned or whatever else.
Or they're not getting out of it what they need or what they want.
Or what they say they are.
Or what they say they are.
Yeah. So she kind of talks in the beginning about the history of wellness. So in 1959, a Dr. Dunn, who came forward and outlined in a paper he wrote called High Level Wellness, he kind of outlined the need for moving past just the physical realities of health. Mm-hmm. In the 1950s and 60s and 70s, medicine was advancing at such a rate that I think a lot of people kind of felt like, okay, yeah, physical aspects of health, they're taken care of. Now let's move into these other aspects, social, emotional, spiritual, kind of mental wellness types of things. And he kind of outlined 4 issues: the increasing interconnectedness through communication technologies, population boom and crowding, aging of the population, and rising tensions because of the tempo of modern life. And I don't know about you, but to me, that sounds exactly like what we're going through still today.
Yeah, here it is, 60, 70 years later, and what he was highlighting as things that we need to or should work to do better at, there's still things today that we should work to do better at. There's a lot of wisdom in the kind of the broader view of things and what he saw as some of the obstacles to individual wellness, overall wellness. So he was a smart guy.
Yeah. Well, and the WHO, the World Health Organization, has in the preamble to their constitution kind of something that he takes as his calling card for wellness, which is health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease and infirmity.
Right, which is a really good reminder, and we've talked a lot about this even in advance of reading the book and sort of diving in specifically, that we have these different life lenses, that when we look at our lives through a particular lens, whether it's financial or social or recreational or sort of this emotional, spiritual, mental, our life looks different, and we really might be doing really well in an area, and looking through that lens, hey, all's great. Or conversely, we might say, "God, I'm not doing well in this particular area. Physically, I'm overweight, or I'm not as active as I'd like to be." And there's the idea that I focus on that one part, and sometimes to the exclusion of some of these other life lenses or some of these other areas of our life. And I think the reminder that getting imbalanced by focusing too much attention on one of those lenses, or you're focusing your too much attention through a particular lens, there's some dangers in it, you know, and it may not only not advance us to kind of that more broad concept of personal well-being, but or wellness, but it may actually move us further from that idea of wellness.
Definitely. It was really interesting to see that kind of the pioneers of this wellness movement 60 years ago weren't really focused on any of the physical health, where today it really is driven primarily by diet, exercise, kind of those physical aspects of wellness. Sleep is another huge part of that wellness movement. And I think it was interesting to read this book and think about what we're missing in terms of the mental, emotional, spiritual kind of wellness that doesn't get quite as much attention, it seems like.
No, for sure.
So she does talk about a lot of interesting things in relation to our focus on the natural, kind of big pharma. Anything that comes out of big pharma is a problem. And so we've moved almost exclusively to this kind of natural first movement. And she talks about it as kind of a problem, both from a regulation standpoint in terms of supplements and things like that, and vitamins, but also in terms of kind of practices that we've taken out of Eastern medicine that we've kind of co-opted and moved into Western medicine without really understanding the full breadth of it. Did you have any thoughts about any of that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that her point was that there's been in the wellness movements for sure, but even I would say societally more broadly, a vilification of big pharma and of kind of what we'd refer to as Western medicine. That those things they're viewed by a lot of people very negatively.
Yeah,
and that the opposite is viewed as this idea of the natural, but also kind of Eastern or more traditional, maybe older approaches to health and wellness, and we've sort of lionized those concepts, and I think that for me, one of the important things, and we'll dive a little bit more into to some of the more specific issues that raises. But one thing that, as I was reading it, and maybe one issue that I took with the book, was this notion that we sort of have to vilify one side and kind of celebrate the other, where for every problem we can point out with the wellness movement and some of the natural and all of that, we certainly can look at some of the errors over time that have been made by Western medicine and big pharma and even science generally, the FDA and the Department of Agriculture. There's a lot of fingers to be pointed in terms of mistakes that have been made over the years. So I didn't love the fact that it was her perspective was very, very clear, and I think she attempted to draw a balance, but in the end, it felt pretty one-sided, and I don't know that that's ultimately all that helpful, even though some of the points that you raised that we'll talk a little bit more about are really valid. I mean, there's a lot of charlatans, a lot of snake oil salesmen that have found their way into the wellness area that have either are misapplying or misunderstanding or misrepresenting some elements of some of these traditional wellness practices that unfortunately that are doing it for profit, and I think that point is certainly fair to make.
Yeah, it's a really tough balance to draw, because I don't think, at least I personally don't believe, that there are very many people out there who are inherently trying to sabotage others' health and wellness for personal gain. I think that a lot of people believe that what they're doing is right, and it's just like you said, with science, you can find a study to back whatever belief you have.
Right.
And I think if you get to a place where you kind of disacknowledge that there's a second
Perspective,
viewpoint or perspective, that you end up getting into kind of this trap where you become
dogmatic.
Yeah,
really.
exactly.
Yeah.
That you there's some real peril there.
Yeah, I agree. So again, kind of that is maybe a broad but soft criticism of the book that I will say, if you're looking at reading it, there's lots of great stuff, super interesting things. I think it's well researched, but be aware that there's an agenda. I mean, there's a very strong perspective, and there is a lot of sort of I would say probably unnecessary vilification.
Yeah.
It gets quite political, which I think would probably be off-putting to some people. But
regardless of political affiliation.
Regardless of political affiliation, for sure. But I guess, that is to me, a bit of the unfortunate thing is, instead of just saying, one side sort of has all the good and is largely noble, even though in fairness, she does acknowledge some problems with Big Pharma. But anytime that you get in a place where you're saying, I have absolute truth, and anyone that agrees with me or disagrees with me is, has bad intentions or is misapplying science, it's always a little bit perilous. And I think she approaches that line a little bit more than I think would have been necessary.
Yeah, I agree. But so some of those natural practices that she goes through, one of them is ayahuasca, which is a psychedelic herbal drug plant that they use in South America. And there's been these retreats, these wellness retreats, where people will go and do this drug in the name of healing. And when she talked to people or researched in conversations with people who have used this traditionally, it's actually only the healer that does the drug in these ritualistic healings, not the people who are doing it. So it's one of those kind of misapplications. I think a lot of people call it cultural appropriation.
That's the term she used throughout the book. Yeah.
But really, it's more of the cultural misapplication or
misunderstanding, misrepresentation. Yeah.
That it really gets you into trouble with some of these things. Yoga is another great example where I maybe knew this anecdotally, but yoga has 8 tiers of kind of hierarchical.
It's a hard word to say.
Yeah, sure is. Tenets that are meant to be followed in order. And the third of which is the physical movements. The fourth of which is breathing. And when I hear about yoga in commonplace, it's only those 2 things. There's the breathing exercises and the physical movements. And so we've kind of taken something that we view as traditional and natural and long-standing, that we're just taking kind of what we want out of it in Western culture. That's what she talks about a lot.
Yeah, and I think that, again, she uses the term cultural appropriation, which I think is a different concept than what she's really highlighting, which is we're not understanding what they're saying.
Yeah.
I mean, we're doing it differently than what that concept is. So we're taking the name.
Yes.
We're using yoga, but what we're doing isn't yoga. And so I think that the flip side of the coin is it's not necessarily bad. I mean, to suggest that a traditional yoga practitioner, a yogi, is going to be offended that someone's stretching and calling it yoga. I mean, gosh, I would hope we'd have thicker skin than that. I mean, they would probably look at us with some level of pity that we didn't understand, the broader concepts and all the benefits that would come from doing the whole thing. But, I feel like it's, again, one of those kind of unnecessary things to be so pejorative about, oh, you say yoga and all you do is stretch and breathe. Wow, okay, well, stretching and breathing is probably still a good thing even on its own. But her point is a really valid one, that we take that, and wellness sort of isolates these things that probably are a little bit more commercial, that you can monetize, and that are a little bit simpler to explain and a bit more digestible. And now that's what they deliver to the market. So I think that is a really fair point that she's making, is that we're not accurately reflecting it. We're not really serving I'm saying but the wellness community isn't really serving those that we are seeking to serve, because we're delivering only the appetizer, not the full meal.
Yeah, with yoga, there's all these great health benefits that we see from traditional practitioners of yoga in Eastern cultures, and then we bring it over and we only take half of it and say you can get the same benefits. But I think it's a lot of times trying to make it more digestible for our Western culture, and the spirituality and sense of world and community just isn't as much a part of it. And so kind of taking it out makes it a lot more digestible for us in Western culture who maybe don't want that. It's
all
harder.
The rest.
Yeah.
And I think 2 points. One, getting back to the idea that wellness is social media. There's no two ways about it. That having a class where you're all stretching and and going through a flow, not only is that easier to do as a group, but in terms of photos and videos and that's just something that has a little bit of play.
Yeah.
But then the second point, again, and I don't think that we should overstate the fact that it's monetizable.
Yeah.
I think that that's an important point that she makes, is that a lot of the wellness community does look at how can I make a living, even if they're well-intended.
Totally.
How do we make a living trying
helping
to
others.
Advance the wellness of other people? And some of the stuff, if you don't have a market for it, I don't want to do levels 7 and 8 of yoga.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to try to force anyone to, and I
Totally.
can't make money. So I think that those are fair acknowledgments that a lot of what we see in kind of the broad wellness thing, from nutrition and exercise, everything else, is a reflection of what the market is willing to pay money for.
Totally.
So
that's one of the great criticisms of capitalism, but that's neither here. That's not for this podcast.
Right. Discuss that some other time.
So we kind of talked about this in the beginning, kind of this flaw of the one-size-fits-all approach. It really is kind of, she makes this point a lot, that kind of our ideal, the Western ideal and modern ideal of health is skinny, really muscular, toned, and that kind of one-size-fits-all, this is what you should be, can be damaging in a lot of ways for other people.
Not only can it be damaging in terms of setting up an ideal that may not actually be your ideal,
Totally.
and sort of chasing it even though it's not providing you the value back. We've talked a lot about this notion of return on investment and what the actual costs and what the return is, what value it brings to you. If you're chasing an ideal that isn't your ideal and spending a bunch of time and energy and you're not getting that payback, that's a bad thing.
Totally.
So I think that the image of this ideal and really not analyzing does it work for us is really important. I think another important element of the one-size-fits-all flaw is this idea that if it didn't work for me, then it must be must be voodoo. It must be,
Yeah.
there must not be value in it. It must not work. And, when you're talking about nutritionist, she's a dietitian, a registered dietitian, and has her PhD. You can talk to 100 different dietitians who will all give you different answers to the same question.
Totally.
And part of it is their personal experience. Part of it is the curriculum that they went through. Part of it is their experience with, with clients.
Yeah.
And all of those are valuable, but they sometimes lead us to get very fixated on what does or does not work for us, or what does or does not work for somebody that we know, or whatever social proofing we're testing it against, and we become really dogmatic, and we don't accept the fact that something that is completely ineffective for me may work wonderfully for somebody else. And to not sort of have the humility to acknowledge that one size doesn't fit all. And even in Western medicine, even in the most controlled of scientific studies, there's variability.
Yeah.
And there's going to be variability that's just not explainable other than individual variability.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing, because that allows us, it's a bad thing on the one hand because it increases confusion, but it's a beautiful thing in that it allows us and encourages us and empowers us to have that be our test. Is it working for me? And that's the important element of identifying those ideals or kind of your molos. Is it moving you towards it?
Yeah.
If it is, it doesn't matter if it hasn't worked for anyone else ever.
Yeah.
If it works for you, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's
and you don't need to
wonderful
go foisting it on other people. That's, I think, where a lot of people really
100%.
get into. That's where a lot of this comes from, is someone finds something that works for them, and then they immediately turn around and they're like, hey, one, I can make money doing this, and two, this should work for everyone else because it worked for me.
And not only that, I have to tell you that everything else, every other thing is bad or isn't as effective as this. It becomes this sort of idea competition, and my idea can win only if every other idea loses.
Totally.
And when you look at the individualization, just the reality of individualization of results and of effort and of interest and everything else. Of course, all different ideas should win, because they will win for different people in different ways.
Absolutely.
So the one piece of that I think is important is she, and I hear this a lot, this notion that really a disparaging view of this placebo, this concept of placebo.
Yeah.
And she talked a fair amount about trauma, and she had some trauma. She didn't explain what it is, but it had some trauma, and talked about some of the other emotional or mental challenges that she dealt with. And it got me thinking a little bit that we have become, and I think it's a good thing as a society, we've become aware of the physiological impacts of some of these mental or emotional issues, whether it's trauma or stress or depression, anxiety, and any of those elements. And we say those are things that are thought-based, they're brain-based, whatever we want to call it, but have physical manifestations, physiological manifestations. And that's true. And those are negative manifestations. But I think there's a tendency oftentimes in Western medicine, and she, to me, felt like she was doing this, of dismissing the other side of that coin, which is the positive. She talked about that book called The Secret, and the idea of having positive thoughts. Manifesting, yes, exactly. And I will say that The Secret, and we talked a little bit about one of her other books, Magic, way too mystical for my tastes. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, there are too many occurrences where people dismiss a positive wellness or even positive health outcome as placebo, almost disparagingly, almost saying that's a bad thing. And as she was talking a little bit about trauma and whatnot, I thought, that doesn't make a lot of sense that we're so fixated. She talked about 15 years worth of psychoanalysis and the benefits, and I'm delighted that it had a positive effect for her. But at the same time, to dismiss people that have found ways to create a positive physiological impact by, again, kind of brain-based states of being or whatever, I think that there's a disservice there.
Yeah, I mean, she talks about the care effect, which is something I'd never heard of, but that a lot of times that people go to these integrative or functional medicine providers, medical providers, and they go into their appointment and it's a 45-minute appointment and they feel completely heard and they walk out, and that care, that perception that they're being cared about actually does have physiological downstream pain relief effects.
Right.
And she kind of dismisses that as, well, now these people are leaning into...
Well, that it's fake.
Yeah.
I mean, that, sure, they feel better, but it doesn't make them better. It's fake.
Yeah. And she doesn't really take that hard of a line on that.
Okay, fair enough.
But she kind of says, yeah, it makes them feel better. It may not cure their cancer, but that's one of the negative things that pushes people into that integrative medicine, where now they're saying, no, I don't want to rely on any traditional medicine because my cancer, I feel a lot better when I see my functional doctor or my integrative medicine doctor. And so there is some danger in that, but I think that discounting that and saying, well, yeah, that's not helpful, is also like the power of positive thinking can go way too far to where people just say like,
I can wish away my cancer
or wish in financial wealth, whatever. Right. But at the same time, saying that that's not something that exists while the opposite is, I think it does really do a disservice to all individuals.
Well, and just looking at it, and we've talked a lot about this outside of this book, but a lot of what we've seen in our life, whether it be gratitude or some of these other practices of just allowing your focus to be on things that are moving you towards what you want, towards
Absolutely.
your molos, there is a power there.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying a mystical power or whatever else, but some of it is you'll notice more of what you look for.
Yeah, it's like driving a car.
Yeah.
If you turn your head, you steer in the direction you're looking.
Right.
And so if you're looking for negative stuff, you're going to experience more of that because of your life lens.
Sure.
So
bottom line is just drawing a dichotomy, saying the answer is in one place or the answer is in the other place. Western medicine or these alternative medicines is an unfortunate... Everyone loses by that. If there's something that can be learned from the placebo effect or from the community aspect of being heard, if there's any positive that can come from that ought to be leveraged by Western medicine.
And vice versa.
Not disparaged. And exactly the same on the alternative medicine side of things.
Yeah,
So.
A lot of lessons to be learned on both sides. And
Right.
a lot of, I think, maybe hubris that prevents that. But that's natural human tendency. And so... but
No
it
question.
was, I mean, again, we did really enjoy, especially the beginning of the book, kind
Right.
of this completely novel thought process about wellness. Not that it's necessarily groundbreaking. Once you hear it, it's one of those things that you think, oh, why didn't I think of that? Which is typically the sign of a great idea.
Yeah.
It does kind of get a little bit political and a little one-sided in terms of the argument as the book progresses. So take that all for what it's worth, but it sparked a great conversation today, and so we do appreciate that.
For sure. And I would say my takeaway in terms of recommending it, if it's something that you're really interested in, of course, reading anything is a good thing. I probably would say find a magazine article summarizing it, get on Blinkist, something. It probably was my favorite, or it was not my favorite book. So
yeah. But on that note, let's finish with Tuesday's top performers. So mine this week comes from Hayden Hillier-Smith. He put out a video this week where he took a scene from a John Wick movie and completely redid the sound design. So he turned off all of the audio and just had the video playing, and then he goes through each level of the sound design. So there's like swords and different things, body parts that he goes through and does each layer of this sound design. And man, it is just so incredible to watch a great editor work just in their own environment. It's a really engaging movie. Or a video. It's a really engaging video. He makes it really funny too. But man, it's such an aspirational thing for me to get better at editing. So
and there's so much that goes into it.
Yeah,
it always
no
blows
question.
my mind. Mine is a little bit weird. I was making an omelet and happened to have next to me a protein shaker, one of those shaker bottles that has the little wire whisk ball in it. And I thought, I wonder if how this would work for just scrambling eggs. So I put my eggs in there, shook it up, and it was magic. I mean, it was life-changing. Awesome way to scramble eggs in a protein bottle. And the takeaway that I had from that, even though that's just a cool little hack, is there's a lot of ways that we can improve our life if we increase our intentionality. If we're just looking for ways to solve problems in our lives, big or small, super small problem in that case, but big or small, if we're really looking and saying, what do we want more of, less of? How do we want to improve things? Our brains are remarkable at finding unexpected solutions. So that was my encouragement from the week, was to be better myself at looking at ways to improve my life in simple, unexpected ways. So
yeah. Well, if you're still here with us at the bitter end, we are so grateful that you've made it this far. Sorry today was a little bit of a ramble, but we do really appreciate you. We'd appreciate it if you subscribe or leave us a review. A review really helps us grow on Apple and Spotify, the audio platforms, and subscribers really help YouTube recommend these videos to others. So that's the best way. If you don't want to do that, share it with a friend who might be too into wellness,
or who might really like omelets and is looking for a better way to scramble eggs.
And we appreciate it, and we'll see you in the next one.